In 1961, British Rail took engines designed for torpedo boats, bolted two of them into a passenger locomotive, and sent it straight onto Britain's busiest main line. Decades later, crew accounts still describe ear protection as standard kit for anyone who had to step into the engine room. Nothing about this was accidental. The engine did exactly what it had been built to do, just not in a setting that suited it. The Napier Deltic engine was designed in the late 1940s to deliver extreme power from the smallest possible package. It was built to run at high RPM for short periods and then be shut down, not to sit inside an enclosed steel box pulling passenger trains for hours at a time. Noise, vibration, and crew comfort were secondary considerations because in its original role, the engine lived in open hulls. The crew wore headsets, and nobody was standing next to it for 6 hours straight. 18 cylinders were arranged in 3 banks forming a triangle, with a crankshaft at each corner, all connected by phasing gears to a single output shaft. It was a 2-stroke design with opposed pistons, which meant no cylinder heads and no valves, just ports in the cylinder walls that opened and closed as the pistons moved past them. The result was described in engineering accounts as producing combustion events at roughly every 20 degrees of crankshaft rotation, which created the distinctive buzzing exhaust note that would later echo through British railway stations for 2 decades. English Electric, who owned Napier at the time, saw an opportunity that nobody else was chasing. In 1955, they built a prototype locomotive at their Preston works with 2 of these marine engines installed, producing a combined 3,300 horsepower, placing it among the most powerful single-unit diesel locomotives of its era. The styling looked like nothing British Railways had seen before, a bulldog nose inspired by American designs, high sides with cream striping to make the bulk look more slender, and a presence that announced this was not just another diesel, but something genuinely new. The prototype spent several years in service and trials on British metals, covering 450,000 miles across a wide range of mainline duties and test work. The London Midland region's chief mechanical engineer reportedly rejected the concept, believing that high-speed engines running at 1,500 revolutions per minute were fundamentally unsuitable for railway applications, and he wanted nothing to do with them. But Gerard Fines at the Eastern region is widely credited in later accounts with seeing exactly what the Deltic could do for his problem, which was that the existing diesels could not match what the Gressley Pacifics had been doing on the East Coast Main Line, and he pushed British Rail's management until they approved an order for 22 production locomotives to replace 55 steam engines. There was just one issue that everyone involved had seen coming, but could not fully solve. English Electric knew that putting 2 naval combat engines inside an enclosed locomotive body was going to create noise problems, so they incorporated soundproofing between the body sides and cab walls from the start. They understood that running at 1,500 revolutions per minute was far beyond what conventional railway diesels produced, and they understood that the 2-stroke firing pattern created acoustic characteristics unlike anything crews had experienced before. The production Deltics arrived with soundproofing already built in. British Rail measured what the crews were actually experiencing, and secondary sources summarizing earlier material state that British Rail considered the cab noise levels unacceptable. That finding led to several additional modifications that eventually brought the range down to 83 to 102 decibels with all doors and windows closed. No publicly available source specifies what the levels were before those modifications, and no source clarifies whether the 19 decibel spread represents the difference between idle and full power or variation between individual locomotives or different measurement positions within the cab. Those details appear to survive only in Brian Webb's 1982 book on the class, which has never been digitized. What we do know is that the post-modification numbers still exceeded what modern occupational health standards consider safe for extended exposure. By current standards, the threshold for mandatory hearing conservation programs is 85 decibels over an 8-hour shift, and Deltic crews were running London to Edinburgh routes that could take around 6 hours, often at levels that pushed well beyond that limit during high-power operation. First-hand accounts fill in what the official measurements leave vague. Former crew members who worked the class described the engine room as a place you simply did not linger unless you wanted to damage your hearing. Multiple crew recollections describe earplugs being used specifically for engine room access, particularly when the steam heating boiler located between the two engines needed attention, a task that was eliminated only after electric train heating conversions began in the early 1970s. A 2019 cab ride report on a preserved Deltic noted that the noise remained noticeable and must have been wearying for regular drivers on long runs, even after all the additional soundproofing that had been installed decades earlier. At the major stations along the East Coast Main Line, King's Cross, York, Newcastle Central, and Edinburgh Waverley, first-hand accounts describe an idling Deltic drowning out the public address system, and a departing one remaining audible for minutes after it had left the platform. The sound reverberating through those Victorian train sheds in a way that no other diesel could match. But the underlying engineering reality kept asserting itself in ways that went well beyond noise. The Deltic engine was what engineers described as highly strung, a term used to describe machinery that demanded precision handling and specialist overhaul rather than routine in situ repair. Accounts describe British Rail maintaining a substantial pool of spare engines at Doncaster to keep 22 locomotives available, and the rapid swap policy that made this work depended on specialist knowledge that English Electric had spent years developing. When British Rail took over engine maintenance themselves in 1970, contemporary accounts suggest it went wrong almost immediately. Within a year or so of the changeover, sources describe half the fleet being grounded at the same time. Fractured cylinder liners, which had always been an occasional problem, escalated alarmingly. The workshops at Doncaster had been designed for conventional railway equipment, and the Deltic engines demanded naval-grade precision that took years to fully master. Exhaust fires became a well-documented Deltic problem during the service years, often attributed in reports and later analysis to oil accumulating in the exhaust system and igniting during sustained high-power running. The original bogies cracked under the punishment of daily 100 miles per hour operation and had to be replaced with stronger cast designs. By the mid-1970s, the bodywork itself was developing cracks and showing rust, raising questions about how much longer these machines could continue. They were too loud, too complex, too demanding of specialist maintenance, and too expensive to keep running compared to what replaced them. On the East Coast Main Line, however, they filled a performance gap that was not fully closed until high-speed train services arrived in 1978. The earplugs stayed in the equipment lockers until the very end, and the crews kept wearing them whenever the engine room demanded attention.